That's one of the best houses in Potong Pasir.
Yeah.
So a fairly large house, and it would probably be somebody who there were people who lived in Potong Pasir, a small number, who were managers or higher level employees in businesses. And they would be the ones who had the more expensive cars. And another thing that surprised people was how many cars and motorcycles that were in Potong Pasir. This had people who were very low income and thus could have needed to afford $30 or less a month. But there were also people who were reasonably affluent by Singaporean standards, certainly.
Do you remember the family that live inside?
No, I don't. I'm afraid the students had to do that because I
Uh,
always could talk to the people.
was
I did come to know several of the people, especially with the student who was studying the spaces. She was a young Indian woman, and her father was most unhappy that she was going to be out there after dark because she wanted to study the use of those spaces as long as people were awake and functioning. And she got to know some of the people there quite well. And I agreed to go out and stay with her while she was doing her research at night. So I benefited from it as well, except the cup of coffee that turned out to be something less than a gift, but with good intentions, but nevertheless.
was there a village headman?
Uh, I'm not certain of that. I don't know
Mm,
that I could say for certain.
okay. I mean, look at the size of the trees. It's just amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did have a publication just of photographs. Uh, you could get it online, and I used this photograph for the cover of because I think it's a pretty spectacular house.
Rare. It's a,
Yes,
no
here
no
you can
problem.
see these narrow spaces at the end of the tree-like passage system. It was just the space that was left when people built houses, and they were used as shortcut. Some of them actually used them for storage, but if you didn't know the area, you could get lost very quickly in some
Mm,
of these
mm, y-
areas.
yeah. So I just want to look at this again. So the houses, so like this one, right? Which is just over the pond, it actually has some stilts. Maybe are most of the houses flat on the ground, or do they are they built on stilts?
No, they're mostly on the ground,
Mm.
which one
Okay.
wonders why, given the fact that the Kowloon River
Yeah.
occasionally flooded them. But unlike the many of the houses in Malaysia and the new villages, they didn't have dirt floors. They usually had concrete or wooden floors.
Yeah. So like these houses here, they have wooden walls. The roof is zinc. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
not only were they often wooden walls, but there were spaces between the boards, which seemed a good reason for having mosquito nets. They they were not certainly airtight. They were good ventilation, but it also must have let in some water when you had a heavy
Mm.
rain.
Yeah. And there is a drain here. So there is some drainage inside the kampong.
Yes,
Mm.
uh, there were no sewers. There were bucket latrines, and there were also a category in the census for people who used the ponds. And that was fortunately about 8%, if I recall the number correctly. It was a very small number that at that time still used them, but in posting pictures on a little street in Singapore, I get comments from people who say, when you mentioned I showed a picture of the latrines, and they said, "Oh, you have no idea what it's like when it's pouring rain, it's dark, and you only have a flashlight. You have to get up and go out of the house to find the bathroom." And that must have been a very unpleasant experience.
This is a glass mirror merchant.
Yes, this is out on Upper Serangoon Road. And you can see the stalls or the food spots.
Yeah.
There is a
Yeah.
restaurant, I think, and certainly several carts that are serving food.
And look at the number of bicycles. So that was the main way to get around, I guess.
Yes,
Yeah.
for many of the residents and for people who came to the area to get the food or to buy some goods that were for
Mm.
sale. The shops that were along Upper Serangoon Road tended to be more like Western shops. They tended to be selling refrigerators or paint or tailor or the things that were used certainly by some of the residents. But in the case of the Upper Serangoon Road, they were people who, uh, many of them had lived either up by the seaport or the naval base and near the airports, uh, that they went there because they were inexpensive compared to the more expensive shops downtown.
I mean, how do you get to Potong Pasir? Was there a bus service that came here?
No, I had a car at
Uh,
100% duty, and
mm,
the uh, the car was a small car, Volkswagen, and I took the students there. Many of them, I think they arrived by bus coming up Upper Serangoon Road.
right.
We did pay the students a real pittance. It was embarrassing how little we paid them, but uh, the department very kindly gave me enough money that we could give them at least a token payment. And they were surprisingly eager to get involved in the research. They wanted to understand the community and the theory and practice of the urbanization. And there were about 5 or 6 people that students that did an honors thesis on Potong Pasir. Uh, the two that were particularly useful for me in my experience is one by the woman who was spending the study of the space. Her name was Ebenezer Jebeloni, and she became a university lecturer, junior
Mm-hmm.
college, and taught geography. She's now retired. And as a result, I've lost contact with her. The other was a gentleman who studied the economic uses there, and he has maps showing where these businesses are located and does considerable analysis. It was both were considered to be first class honor thesis.
Mm.
But there were
Speaking,
also others. There was one who
yeah,
something that was popular at the time was mental geography, how people envisioned their environment and how they navigated through the area. And it was an interesting one, but it was a little harder for him to get hold of the real essence of the system. It was a very complex problem he sought to undertake.
yeah. Speaking of studies of Potong Pasir, did you have a colleague in the geography department called Leo?
Leo Rangroenten
That's right. Yeah.
was a Dutch student who came out and he learned about Singapore and what was there. He had a professor, Gerald Templeman, who was doing work on a research project in Indonesia. And he often came and stayed with my wife and I. And Leo was one of his students, and he came out and did a very good uh, study. He gave me a copy of it, but unfortunately it was in Dutch. And I don't read Dutch. German, yes. Dutch, no.
No, I have the English one. I mean, I read it for my thesis, and fantastic. I mean, like his conclusion was that there were new immigrants coming to Potong Pasir who didn't go through Chinatown, right? So they come from, let's say, Malaysia and even China, and they knew to go directly, right, to
I think it had a
Potong
pretty wide
Pasir.
uh, reputation.
Mm. Yeah, quite amazing. So I'm glad to have found someone who knows him, because I was wondering why is there this study on Potong Pasir at the time. But as you are saying now, You were there to study there, to study the kampong, and as well as your students who wrote several theses on the kampong as well.
Yes, I think you can probably get access to the
Mm,
honor theses in
yeah,
Department of Geography. I don't know whether the National University has them or not.
that's you.
No, that's not me.
That's not you. Who's that?
It was just somebody who was standing there sheltering from the rain. But I like his pants there, the
Yeah, that's right.
pants, very flat.
Fashionable in those days. So, okay, what was he doing there? He was shopping there.
He was shopping, yes. And this was out on Upper Serangoon Road, portion of the village.
Okay, wow, look at this photo.
That's Malay Fishermen up of Terengganu. Pulau Kapas is offshore. We've been out there to have a holiday swim. And when we came back, they were on the beach. And I got permission to take the photograph, but they were not looking very much like they enjoyed the experience.
Where were they fishing? Were they fishing in the area or elsewhere?
They were going offshore Terengganu. Maybe
Ah,
they went further out. I don't know how far out they went, whether they were doing coastal fishing or whether they went out and actually did deep sea fishing.
yeah, right. Wow. Ah, this is a fantastic photo.
Well, I'm afraid that you got photographs I hadn't intended, but have no problem with sending to you because they're about fingernail size images. And with my vision, I got more photographs than I thought. So I'm glad you're enjoying them because that's what they're meant for. But you
Uh,
won't see a garden like that in any HDB estate.
no, no.
One of the
Ah,
problems, I think, especially in the early years of HDB, was the designers, the people who were doing the planning for the HDB blocks, had been educated abroad. They were educated in the US or Australia or England. And as a result, they had adopted the style that went for that area rather than for a place like Singapore. So they had designed features that were not really suitable to Singapore. I know, for example, that the had a master bedroom concept in the early blocks, and master bedroom took up space. It was a big bedroom, and they would rather have had the space to have furniture and other activities. And of course, you couldn't go in and just plant flowers and bushes and trees anywhere because they wanted the block to look nice. They wanted a public facade that made it into an attractive place, not like Potong Pasir, which looks very disreputable, very disorganized, even though that was somewhat of an illusion. But of course, you also had one of the early problems they had when people began to be located from areas like Potong Pasir into HDB blocks was they would put pots of plants on the railing and
uh-huh.
they would sometimes get knocked off and
Okay.
a big pot falling 21, 22, 23 stories is definitely a lethal uh, item. And so here I've got photographs of them with their plantings, their fruit trees, decorative trees, sometimes not very attractive plantings, but they loved them and they really treasured them. And when they went to an HDB block, in the early days at least, I don't know what it is today, they were not allowed to do that. So
Yeah,
that would be another mark against HDB that might seem to outsiders as a minor thing, but it was important to them. They really valued their plants and their decorations.
people still do. There are still some families who do that. Do you remember this photograph? This,
Yes,
yeah.
that is taken during a community meeting, uh,
Ah,
residents, and they had several areas within the area around the ponds where they gathered. I have a photograph of a platform with two young men laying on it overlooking the pond. And they gathered, there was a real community sense among at least a significant portion of the residents. I don't know, perhaps among all of them, but they really did enjoy meeting. And this may well have been a very special meeting to discuss or make a presentation on the demolition of the community and the new estate that was going to be coming up,
Hmm.
or what the subject of the conversation was.
Yeah. Do you know if there was like a committee that was organizing, like negotiating with HDB on compensation, on relocation?
Yes, at least a supposition, because I've got photographs of a meeting with community members that were obviously being given a lecture. They weren't just getting together to enjoy the company and have fun. And there, it was in one of these areas in the community where it was designed to be a congregating area, a place where people could get together. And it was quite a sizable crowd. There must have been 25, 45 people there.
Mm. Now, you said that people were determined to remain in Potong Pasir. Um, you know, when you were in the field there, were people angry? Were people fearful? I mean, what was the emotional kind of state among the residents?
I think there was a certain amount of unhappiness. I'm not certain I would call it anger,
Mm.
but they were also pretty realistic in that my the story I was told was that at one of the elections towards the end, they almost unseated a senior member of government, and this was sort of a step too far. And as a result, it was decided by the government to accelerate the demolition and reconstruction of an HDB estate. And incidentally, I've been to the Potong Pasir estate, and it is a very attractive HDB community. They have a nice senior center, good food stalls. They've got a couple shops there selling vegetables and fruits, and they have a nice community center. And so once they saw what they were going to get, perhaps they were less hostile to the idea. But uh, one of the students had created a map showing where the people were sent from Potong Pasir. And majority of them, I would say, are within a quarter to a half mile of the HDB blocks, HDB estates that are in that area. So they were not really dislocated to the sense that they were taken out of their neighborhood, but there were some who were sent to Jurong, some who were sent up to the Causeway area, and the map doesn't have numbers on it, so you can't see how many people were sent. But they were scattered over the island, and that was what some of them feared very much. That uh, I know that I was told by Singaporeans that when Singapore had the two-child policy, uh, which we benefited from actually, we had three boys while we were there. They, if you had more than two, you no longer got to choose the school you wanted to go to. They chose the school you were going to go to, your children were going to go to. And you often got into the less desirable schools as punishment for not being more cooperative and following the plan. Um, and there were some subsequent changes to that policy that were very interesting. I know that the university had ship cruises for young students there in the hopes that their romance would bloom and that
Mhm.
they would get married and begin a family.
Yeah.
So this was meeting. I had to feel very uh, careful about what I was doing. I didn't want to raise fears among the people that I was a sort of spy, that I was asking all these questions because I was gathering information to be used against them. So we tried not to intrude too greatly. We thought we were really pushing our luck with investigating their interior of their houses. So I just would ask a simple question: Are you having a meeting, or are you just gathered here congregating? And they would say, "Well, we're having a meeting." I never asked them what it was. Didn't want to spoil the ambience of cooperation and being pleasant to us.
It's very interesting to talk about this bigger context. Potong Pasir wasn't just any kampong in Singapore. Um, and you mentioned the elections. And of course, if you talk to any Singaporean about Potong Pasir, the thing they'll talk to, they'll remember would be the elections and Chiam Tong particularly, and how this was an opposition ward for, I think more than 20 years. So let me just kind of recount the political history of Chiam Tong. He first contested, his first electoral contest was not in Potong Pasir, but in Cairnhill in the city. And he lost that one in 1976. In 1979, he decided to stand in Potong Pasir against Howe Yun Chong. Of course, Howe Yun Chong was just leaving, I think, the Ministry of National Development, right? His first electoral contest for the PAP. And Chiam Tong decided to stand against him. He lost. Chiam Tong only won a third of the votes, but he didn't give up. The next election in 19 no wait the 1979 was a by-election, and the general elections the following year in 1980, Chiam Tong stood again, lost again to Howe Yun Chong. He had, I think, 7% more votes, but still lost. And then he stood again in 1984, the next election. Howe Yun Chong is no longer there. There's a new PAP candidate, Ma Bao Dan, who later on became a very successful minister as well. And this time, Chiam Tong won resoundingly. From 40% of the votes, he won 60%. He got an additional 20% of the votes in Potong Pasir in 1984, and he became the second opposition MP in Parliament. So were you aware of all this opposition politics and support for the opposition when you were there doing your research?
Uh, Remotely. It was made quite clear, like most outsiders
Yeah.
from the West who came, that we were not to get involved in local politics, and that if we did, we would almost certainly find ourselves on a quick flight back home.
So your students never ask about politics?
No.
No.
They were surprised, though, that we did not have ID cards in the US. They couldn't believe that. They said, "How do you know who you are?" And I thought that was a funny statement. Well, I know who I am because I am who I am.
Do you think that the opposition to the government was largely founded on the issue of housing and resettlement?
I don't know for certain. My feeling is that it was quite likely a large portion of it,
Mm,
that they felt like they were being unfairly singled out and being unfairly treated by making them move from the home they love. But that is my assumption. I have no
mm,
idea if that is actually the case or not.
mm. And your students never mentioned that either, like off the cuff, like in their casual conversation with you.
Students were very discreet. They did not.
I like the way you put it. So this is another part of, again, along the pond, right?
Yes, that's a Potong Pasir version of HDB. So that is multifamily housing. And as you can see, it
Mm,
is in very sad repair. Lots of
mm,
patching, lots of
yeah,
ones put on the roof. And
yeah,
it was not a place I think many outsiders would have chosen to live. But it looks rather nice as a photograph.
yeah, yeah.
Very
Um,
colorful, very.
yeah. And do you know the building here?
The steeple in the distance is a mosque.
Right.
It's an Indian mosque that's just across Upper Rangoon Road. This is the area at the northeast corner of the pond, Big Pond. The previous photograph is along the northern shore of the Big Pond. Along on the other side is Potong Pasir Road.
Yeah. And as you were saying, there's a contrast, right, between the houses that are the smaller houses with patch roofs along the waterline, and then in the background, much bigger houses that are better maintained.
Actually, I think the tile roof there that you see is along Upper Serangoon Road is the shop houses that are.
Ah, okay.
This
Wow.
is the curve of the pond at that point is where that photograph was taken.
Right. Provision shop.
Now, I forget how many provision shops there were, but I think there were close to 8 or 10, and they seemed to have some sort of specialization. There was one that had a lot of bottles, and I don't know if it was a liquor shop or not. I don't know what was in the bottles, but I took pictures of all of them because it was interesting to see the appearance of them and what they had inside. Uh, that Many of them were open front like this, but others were not. They were amazingly full of goods. One doesn't, I can't see how you would possibly be able to get all of that in there and have any room to actually walk around. But they were generally the things that you would need on a daily basis. There's one with a coconut grater right in the front with its
Mm.
big aluminum tub, and there were others that had fruit, others had flowers, some had glass cases, some did not, most did not actually. And there is one that was out at the back of the community in the northwest area of the pond area that looked like a terrible building. I don't know whether it was a real uh, provision shop or whether it was just had a few things left over from when it was. But it was really a very decrepit structure. And there were many places that were not provision shops, but showed you the freedom that the residents had to do things. They would build a shelter out under the front of the house that was a restaurant. They might have only 2 chairs and 2 tables, but they had food that was available. And there were these, obviously, somebody making extra money by starting a little business that was perhaps popular with neighbors or popular with working men in the area. But it was always interesting to see the entrepreneurial spirit that many of these residents had. Uh, they really were very ingenious in the ways that they could think of to make money to help out with finances.
What do you mean by that? Could you give some examples? What kind of ingenious ways?
There were 2 or 3 restaurants that I have photographs of that were obviously added on to somebody's house. And it was definitely small scale. There's one that had 4 chairs and 2 tables, and it was open at the front. And people obviously walked up and got things. Some of them could come inside and sit down, but you could not have any crowd going into that place. It was probably about 8 to 10 feet by 4 or 5 feet in size, and it was very small. There were other places where they were obviously cooking some sort of carry-out food that they had added on a space. And then there were several of the places had these little lean-to type structures added onto the front of their house for their bicycles or their motorcycles, and sometimes they made goods there. They would make a small shop out of it, where they would manufacture some small item. Oh, there's the benches I was
Ah,
mentioning. with the two young men laying there and doing what young men do.
I mean, you look at the walls here; they are really in a bad state.
Yes, they were
Yeah.
just to provide some privacy. They were not really walls that were meant. They weren't part of a house. They
Right.
were
Right. Yeah.
this sort
Right.
of lean-to area.
Okay.
But it was often had people there in the evening, sitting there talking and perhaps having a cigarette or cigar. And uh, it was a place where people congregated casually, informally, just to have companionship with their neighbors. And that's one of the houses I really like. They obviously went all out on gardening.
Mm.
And this was an interesting contrast to those houses where obviously no attempt was made to beautify the structure. And here they had lots of plantings, and it was a rather nice house. I don't think I would want to live there with no sanitation, but it was a place that looked like it would be a comfortable place to live.
What have you done with the photos? Have you given them to the library here?
I gave I gave them my slides uh, that some of them were going to have to take some repair. And at the time, I didn't have the time to do it. I wanted them to be saved. So I gave them, at one point, almost everything I had, I thought. And it was a fairly sizable box. And when I went to Singapore in 2019, I gave them a map that I had that I really regretted later when I was trying to do some work. It had the house numbers on all of the structures. And so I could tie them to specific floor plans or images that I had. And it was, uh, this was a really diverse community, and I tried to document that just for myself, for nothing else, because I really that is basically what I do now. Is with my vision and my hearing, I spend almost all of my spare time working on getting my photographs put
Mm.
together, and when they're finished, I will be giving them all to the National Museum. I keep hoping there'll be somebody in the geography department or anthropology or sociology that will see these and decide that they want to do a follow-up study and interview the people that had to move and find out what life was like once they were in the new uh, HGB quarters. Uh, because some of the quarters now are very nice. I understand there are some that you can sort of adjust where the walls and so forth will go, and it's much different than those earliest blocks that were a family, an entire family of 4 or 5 people to one room. That must have been a very difficult situation, but it did mean they had a roof over their heads and a place to sleep that was safe.
Mm. When you were there in the late 70s, were people already moving out?
There was the recycling of the HCB blocks. I mean, I
Okay.
have photographs of Chinatown and some HDB blocks that were being torn down and rebuilt. And in that respect, HDB learned their lessons well, I think. I had some faculty members from the university that stayed here long after I did, and they were living in an HDB flat, and they showed me photographs of it. It was quite a nice flat. I mean, it was something you could easily find in one of the amazing major cities of the United States. So they did learn and they did improve as the situation became less urgent and less severe. And it must be remembered, I think, that those early structures were a crash program. They were trying to find a place for the 16,000 or so people in Phuket Ho Sui to live. Where would they go if they didn't have that? And the they did a job that was astonishingly superior to that of the colonial administration, who did they were always going to do something. They would always have studies. They would always do a report, and then nothing ever happened. And the residents saw, I think, in my estimation, a certain discrimination there that they wanted the local population to provide workforce and to grow what vegetables were available and to be shopkeepers and so forth, but they were not really important compared to the port and the military. And I think I would have felt quite badly about that. And that they now get a better deal from the government. The government, particularly Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, may have been a very severe, demanding man, but he did what very few other leaders in the world have accomplished. Singapore is sort of a model for the world. I don't think there are many other places that can claim they have firsts in so many things, first in airport, first in airline, first in schools, and so forth. And Singaporeans, in my experience, are very proud of what they've accomplished. And I think probably most of the people who were in Potong Pasir discovered that the HDB blocks were not what they had thought they were. And that since that time, they have been improved and their standard of living is now on a par with any city, any country in Asia, and in fact, superior to many countries in the West. So it's been an interesting experience for me as somebody who was interested in that area and in that concept to see the changes that have occurred since 1964 to the time I left in 1983.
Ah.
It was an amazing experience.
So when you left in 83, there was the kampong still there or had it been demolished?
It was being demolished. I've got photographs of the kampong being torn down. I have one
Right.
photograph of an old woman standing in front of a home. I don't know if it was hers or if it was just a neighbor's or maybe just a building that she was familiar with, but she was standing there looking absolutely distraught because the building it looked like it had had a fire perhaps, but it was completely demolished and just the bare frame still standing. And it's one of the pictures I really have always liked. Well, if you have a particular interest and I have photographs that are of that, I will be glad to send them to you, some of the maps as well. Some
Oh.
of them have become a little tattered and torn, so I'm trying to recreate them, recreate the originals. And thank goodness for AI. AI
Mm.
we're being warned that it's going to kill humanity in the future, but it really does amazing jobs on photographs. Appreciate the opportunity you've given me. I've enjoyed your work and that of Jerome Lim, and you are preserving things. I hope this doesn't offend, but I think from what many Singaporeans told me, the government did not do a very good job of preserving features of the old Singapore. They couldn't be, I mean, Chinatown, they refurbished the shop houses, but they don't look at all like the shop houses did when they were new.
Mm.
And they're sort of garish looking. They're
Mm.
sort of something you would expect to see in Disney World. And so many people said to me when they found out what I was doing, oh, I love those pictures. My grandfather, my father used to live right over there, right over there.
Mm.
And I'm going to see him this weekend and I'm going to talk to him about what life was like in Potong Pasir. And I think the younger generations are now sad and unhappy about what's happened to the old colonial buildings that could have been preserved and utilized in an effective way here. But that is not my country. It's not my town. It's not my community. So I really don't wish to be too critical of it, but I do think that people are eventually going to regret the fact that these places are gone.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the question of heritage, right? So Potong Pasir, do you think there should have been some way to conserve the kampong or parts of it?
It would have been expensive because to preserve it in a satisfactory way, you would have needed to install sanitary lines. You would need to extend the water. There was tap water for a very significant portion of the community. Otherwise, you had to use wells, or there were people, actually a small percentage, who were using pond water.
Mm.
And you would have had to put in infrastructure that I think the government didn't want to invest because it was going to be for a very small area and for a purpose that they did not necessarily feel was necessary.
Mm.
But I think the opposite would have been to make it into a Disney World and to have it be unauthentic by making it into, and I think that to a certain extent is what's happened with Chinatown, is to make it a tourist attraction rather than an actual community. But I did see some areas, photographs of some areas in Chinatown that they made into very, very nice, very attractive facilities. Some were residences, some were shops, some were utilitarian, not for tourists. And I think that as distance becomes greater, it's hard for me to get it into my head that it was 50 years ago that I first went to Singapore for the university, 1974. And I am so grateful that I got to see all the change, to see Singapore go from a colonial city with all of its limitations to being one of the leading urban centers in the world, literally. Uh, it is an amazing place today, and I wish I could afford to live there. Uh, and but I would love to still be living in Singapore. I know people say you're an Hongbo, you can't really like it that much, but it changed my life, and Malaysia did as well. And I love it really as much as I love my own home country here. It's different. I know that I could never be really part of that life. I would always be a stranger. I would always be an outsider. But it is such an interesting place. The diversity in food, the diversity in holidays, the diversity in customs, and all of the things that were so attractive to a boy who grew up in a town of 10,000 in West Central Ohio. There was a song that's now being used in an ad here, far away places, calling to me. I remember that song. It influenced my life. It made me want to go to see the world. And my hometown was, we had two Italian families. One was a grocer, a little grocer, and the other was a shoe repairman. We had one Greek family. They had a restaurant. We had basically English, Dutch, and German people. And I referred to it in one of the things I wrote as a vanilla town. And, everybody was pretty similar, small, not 10,000 people. It was not really, it had been a railroad town. They had a repair facility there, roundhouse, and it was served farms around it. But it was as uninteresting a place to live as I've ever been, I think. And I couldn't wait to get out of it and uh, get to see the world. And I've been very fortunate. I've been around the world 5.5 times, 3 times courtesy of the university in Singapore, once according to a publisher who wanted me to revise an atlas the department did while I was there. And going out there and coming back the first time was, it's, who could have ever expected that? Who could ever have planned to do that? And all it cost me was just a little extra when I had my children to pay the difference, because even though I was living in New Orleans, I was interviewed by the Singapore ambassador at the UN, who was a law professor at the university. And
Yeah.
yes,
Mm.
and I was considered to have been hired almost exactly halfway around the world from Singapore. So it just cost me a few $100s to make every trip around the globe. And I was hoping I would get one more because I had never been to Africa, and I wanted to see East Africa and the game parks with my children. I thought they would really enjoy seeing that.
Mm.
And I always wanted to go to Malta, which is a most amazing archaeological site. It has everything from Stone Age up through the Crusades and British colonial rule. It I feel lucky now that I'm finding all but one or two of my college friends are dead, and you begin to feel a little like you're getting close to the end when you don't have any of your friends left, and everything begins to go wrong. I've got macular degeneration. I'm severely deaf, and I have bad knees. I can't walk more than 100 yards. And as a result, we sort of abandoned the idea of traveling again back
Mm.
to Singapore. And
But thank you so much, Jack, for sharing your memories and your field. I really enjoyed listening to your account.
oh, well, thank you very much. At my age, you begin to, that's why I've been sort of going back and reading through some of my things and trying to get things
Yeah.
familiar in my mind again because uh, I was a city planner for Long Beach, California. I was in charge of the future planning. And we were surprised when we moved up here to Novato that it had been 30 years in Singapore. And because we'd never lived any place before longer than 9 years, 9 years in Singapore. And so I really am so appreciative of your opportunity that you're providing because I have been interested in following you on the internet, and Jerome Lim has been somebody who's posted some of my pictures.
Yeah.
And on Facebook, almost all of my friends in the world now are Singaporeans or Singaporean expatriates. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
No, I'm going to give you another opportunity. Let's arrange another time, right, to talk about the new villages. I'm very interested in that.
I'd be glad to. It was
Fantastic.
not as nice as Singapore, but it was interesting. It was the solution to a very bad problem.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a very compelling history there. When I was doing my PhD, I had a Malaysian friend, a fellow student. He did a social history of the new villages in Malaysia. Mm.
Well, there I got a Facebook friend from Sinai over now. I guess it's now the airport for Johor Bahru, and she was raised in Sinai, and her parents were teachers there. And she turned out to live not too far from us in Long Beach. And we got together a couple of times and got familiar. And they were just here for a week, 2 weeks ago. And she was excited that I was going to be doing this. She said, I hope you have a good time. And I had a really good time.
Thank you so much, Jack. I'll be in touch.
You too. And I'll send you some
Yes,
photographs,
yes.
maps.
Yeah,
So, hopefully, maybe one day before too long, I'll send you a copy of a book.
that's right. And that's something I'm looking forward, especially to reading. Thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you.
Talk to
Have a
you again. Yeah. Bye bye.
good